This project embodies a vision close to my heart: to make a real difference in and through cultural diplomacy. Through a series of global events, we foster knowledge exchange across disciplines, bridge public and private sectors, unite scholars, administrators, and practitioners. We empower early career researchers and help them find their voice. Together, we are building an open, inclusive network where ideas are freely shared and collaboration can thrive.
And I've argued that it's important to have these terms that can evolve and move with the times, because there's a shifting...
After more than a quarter of a century, 25 years, we are once again discussing cultural diplomacy.
Is our goal, because that reflects our society, and I think that differentiates certainly the United States.
Academic advisor on the impact and legacy. I hope by the end of the presentation you still can see me.
And the great thing that we're going to do today between me and Dr. Zulal is going to be talking, but rather like the can-do spirit of private enterprise. Spontaneous and generous.
We want to bring attention to the similarities and differences of these various approaches.
首先，我今天这个主题我觉得非常有意义啊，就是我们在不同视角。
Because I'm not only focused on one art form, but multiple art forms. It's like my first year. We have had the academic discussion and we have heard.
And as we know, a lot of the literature on this topic, a lot of the theoretical and the conceptual debate is all around how cultural diplomacy is surrounded by this abundance of terms. So cultural relations, cultural imperialism, cultural diplomacy, soft power, propaganda, public diplomacy, and how these terms are used vaguely, loosely, interchangeably. These terms are subjective and these boundaries are blurry depending on who you are, where you're from in the world, your relationship to culture. And I've argued that it's important to have these terms that can evolve and move with the times, because there's a shifting political backdrop. This term cultural diplomacy sits against something that's moving all the time. And that's important, even if it doesn't make life easy for us as scholars and our analysis.
But the challenge of touring an orchestra is the funding and also the number of people and the scale, which is often quite a challenge. So we usually at least tour with 130 people, with hundreds of cargo shipping to a place because of the instrument, the score, and things like that. We have dancers from Hong Kong, mainland, Taiwan, Malaysia, and Macau. They all hold different visa, and you can actually imagine when you go to a country, how many liaison and paperwork you have to fill in.
We don't do culture. We rely on the American people for culture and American organizations like other democratic societies. But I would say highlight first thing, who are the actors? The actors in our cultural diplomacy, I would say, obviously there's the United States Department of State, and there are other parts of the US government who we partner with. We have our implementing partners, which are across the country, which will be non-government organizations working in the field of culture and the arts. And they bring the expertise, they bring the ability to deliver culture. We have our embassies and consulates overseas who actually deploy what is done, the result of this. And we have arts and cultural figures, often individually. They can be artists, musicians, chefs, writers, etc., both domestically and abroad.
Governance has always been a matter of how cultural diplomacy gets conducted. It hasn't been just government, it hasn't been just private.
So in Southeast Asia, we find that this concept of gotong royong and tolong menolong, helping each other, working together, bringing the community along in their field of experiences is a key cornerstone of how cultural diplomacy can work.
This area of work to me is incredibly important. It's incredibly important in an increasing period of times of conflict and crisis to understand and want to understand other people.
The People to People Music Project began as a government-funded program that was closely aligned with Eisenhower's propaganda goals. But it evolved into a citizen-run program that continued to fulfill those goals. Remarkably, the project continues to this day. This project has relied on the professional skills and the volunteerism of thousands of people. Most of them were women, a class of people who many politicians of the 1950s assumed would have little interest in world politics.
I come from Southeast Asia, and culture is rooted in people.
I think in terms of cultural diplomacy and indeed cultural relations as per the British Council, the underlying question or the kind of foundational question that I think we always ask is, what kind of world do we want to live in?
But I think sometimes we just forget about the use of soft power during conflicts, and we are paying too much attention to the hard power.
So how do you balance between the local culture and how do you balance between aligning with the national, diplomatic strategy? I think that needs to be further discussed.
How do we cut out the noise, and how do we come back to a philosophy that embraces about what do we want in terms of our own shared heritage as a global community?
Thank you very much. I very much enjoyed our discussion. I hope you were the same.
So thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you so much, everyone. So it is my pleasure.
Thank you for having me. Obviously sitting on a panel with...
Thank you very much for joining us online.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this panel.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here. Thank you.